Welcome to Talir. This is a place called Bud. This is budding forth for a new life, and we are Capuchins working for the renewal of the society and the church.
Dear brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, welcome to Talir Capuchin Online Ministries. This is the ministry for monthly recollection. This December, we are preparing ourselves for the coming of Jesus Christ. God comes, ever comes. He comes every moment, at an unexpected time, in an unexpected way. This is how Jesus builds the bridge between heaven and earth by becoming human. Christmas is becoming human. We need to become human. We need to become bridge between one to the other, just as Jesus did in the entirety of his life. There is an invisible thread that is bridging us between humanity and divinity. Jesus comes with an invisible thread. This month, we are going to specially reflect on the invisible thread for this recollection. We are very happy to have Reverend Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence has finished his research degree in psychological therapy and counseling. He is presently the head of the department of the psychology department in Anugraha, Dindikal, India. Here comes Reverend Brother Lawrence.
Dear friends in Jesus Christ, the unseen thread in our lives. Let us start looking at the story of Joseph in Old Testament. We find in Genesis 45, 1-2, Joseph is revealing his identity to his brothers. Joseph remains as a very powerful person in Egypt. He stands next only to Pharaoh. He is even called as the father of Pharaoh. And he is revealing his identity to his brothers who did not know it was Joseph. So Genesis 45, 1-2 is a beautiful account of Joseph revealing his identity to his brothers. Dear friends, Genesis 45, 1-2 would not have happened if there was no Genesis 37, 5-11. In Genesis 37, 5-11, Joseph has dreams. As the youngest one in the family, he has a dream that his brothers bow down before him. Because of these dreams, the brothers get very jealous and angry with Joseph. And in fact, Joseph has continuous dreams where not only his brothers, even his father bows down before him. And it creates so much of jealousy and anger that the brothers want to murder him. We read in Genesis 37, 12-36, that they wanted to kill him. And Reuben, one among them, wants to save him, but he's afraid of his other brothers. So he tells, let us put him in this pit, in this well which has no water, thinking that Reuben can save him later. But to the bad luck of Joseph, there are some merchants who are going to Egypt. So these brothers have an idea. Let us sell him as a slave. Let us sell him as a slave, so that we don't kill him. The blood is not in our hand. So they sell him as a slave to Egypt. And we find this story is evolving after Joseph being sold as a slave. We read in Genesis 39, 1-10, that Joseph is bought by a landlord, and Joseph is very dedicated and hardworking. So he trusts him and makes him master of the household. But unfortunately, the fortune of Joseph did not last for a long time. The lady accuses him, and Joseph is put into prison. We read in Genesis 39 11 to 23, Joseph is in prison. We find the story evolving in Genesis 41. There were two other prisoners with Joseph who were actually working in the palace of Pharaoh. For some reason, they were in the prison and they have a dreams, and nobody is able to interpret the dreams. And Joseph is interpreting their dreams, and he's telling to one prisoner that you will be restored back to the palace. And to one he's telling the dream indicates that you will be killed. And the dreams come true. And the story evolves that in Genesis 41 1 to 36, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has a dream. And he wants anybody to interpret the dream. Many people in the kingdom are trying to interpret the dream of Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is not satisfied and he believes that his dream is not interpreted. When Pharaoh is getting desperate, the prisoner who was with Joseph, whose dream Joseph interpreted and who was restored to the palace of Pharaoh, he is there and he is telling to Pharaoh, Pharaoh, if you permit me, I had a dream in the prison, and there was a guy, Joseph. He interpreted the dream. Not only in my case, in the other prisoner's case also, the dream came true. Do you want to bring Joseph to interpret the dream? Pharaoh was so desperate and he said, bring him now. Joseph came and he listened to the dream of Pharaoh and he interprets, for the next 7 years there is going to be plenty of harvest. And the following 7 years it is going to be a famine, no food to eat. This is the meaning of the dream. Pharaoh is convinced of the interpretation and he tells Joseph, you look after. As Joseph predicted, 7 years there was plenty of harvest. And since Joseph knew that there's going to be famine, he built big barns all over Egypt and he started to gather grains when all other nations were not prepared. And when the famine came, for years, nobody else in the world there was food except Egypt because they were prepared for 7 years. And when the famine came, there was no food to eat anywhere in the world, whole world, but in Egypt. And Pharaoh was so much happy and he called Joseph as the mother of Pharaoh because he was feeding the entire nation of Egypt. So he only stood next to Pharaoh with all power and might. So he was feeding all the people in. He was feeding all the people in Egypt. Not only in people in Egypt, that people from outside also came to Egypt to get food. Similarly, the brothers, the sons of Jacob, the brothers of Joseph, were coming to Egypt to collect food. Fair. Now Joseph, standing next only to Pharaoh, sees his brothers who wanted to kill him, who sold him. So first he inquires about them. He sends food and he's asking the youngest one to come back. The second time, he gives them some food and he instructs his servants to hide some vessels. When they go back, he captures them and accuses them stealing of something, and they are terrified. At the time, Joseph could not control his emotions. He reveals his identity to them. Joseph reveals that I am your brother whom you wanted to kill and whom you sold into Egypt as a slave. So we read in Genesis 45 1 to 2, Joseph revealing his identity. Dear friends, Genesis 45 1 to 2 would not have happened if there was no Genesis 37 5 to 11 and all the consequent subsequent events. Let us pause for a moment and think what would have been the feelings of Joseph on his way to Egypt. When he was sold as a slave, how the feelings of Joseph would be. For a Jewish person, he or she thought that they are son of daughter of God, and to become a slave, that they are no more free sons and daughters of what an agony. And in those days, Joseph's hands would have been tied, and these people were dragging him in the desert to Egypt. What would have been the agony of Joseph being sold as a slave, and being sold as a slave by his own brothers? If they even killed him, Joseph would have felt the pain just for a minute. But Joseph was feeling this pain throughout. What would have been the feelings of Joseph? What would have been the feelings of Joseph when Joseph won the trust and confidence of the master, and the master in Egypt made him as the master of the household? What would have been the feeling of Joseph that he was falsely accused by the woman and was put into prison? What would have been the feeling of Joseph when he became next only to Pharaoh, and he was even called as mother of Pharaoh? Dear friends, in our life, there are no isolated events. There is no past, present, and future. In our life, they are not isolated events. Everything in our life is connected. The past is connected to the present, and the present is connected to the future. In fact, the past is the foundation of the present. The present is the foundation of the future. The past influences the present, and the present becomes the foundation to the future. In our lives, there's no past, present, and future. They are all connected. It is said our lives become just a chronicle if there are isolated events. Chronicle means there are some independent events. This happened, that happened, this happened. Our life is not a chronicle. Our life is an integrated whole. Together, the past, the present, and the future make our life as a whole. Events of our life are interconnected. In my opinion, an invisible thread connects all. And I call that as the hand of God, as the providence of God. We must realize that in Psalm 139:13, the psalmist says beautifully, "It was you who formed my inmost part and knit me together in my mother's womb." I always wonder that the psalmist would have simply said a word. "It was you who formed my inmost part and made me together in my mother's womb." The psalmist is careful to use the word knitting. You know, knitting. Knitting involves each careful spinning of the threads. Each spinning is carefully done. Psalmist is right that God has planned every activity of our lives carefully. And in fact, everything is connected carefully by God's plan. If you look at the story of Jesus, if you look at the story of Joseph, we find if any one of these events has not happened, Joseph's revelation would not have happened. If Joseph did not have dreams, his brothers would not have been angry. If there was no Reuben to intervene and put him, they would have killed him. If Joseph was not sold into Egypt, he would not become Pharaoh of Egypt, or next only to Pharaoh to Egypt. If the lady did not accuse him, he would not have gone into prison. When Joseph was in prison, if there were no fellow prisoners who were from the palace, Joseph would have never been known to Pharaoh. If the prisoners did not have dream and Joseph did not interpret the dreams, Pharaoh would not have known Joseph. In fact, Everything is connected. If not even one event, if there was not one event taking place, probably this story of Jesus would story of Joseph would not be there. Dear friends, nothing happens by accident. There is an invisible hand of God that is guiding carefully all that is happening in our life. This we find beautifully Joseph realizing and telling that. Imagine the situation. Joseph, whom they wanted to kill, whom they wanted to murder, whom they have actually sold, is standing next only to Pharaoh, and to him they are coming. Imagine the situation. If you could imagine the situation, how terrified these brothers would have been. How bad these brothers would have been feeling. And they were trembling. And what Joseph is going to do, they were so terrified. Joseph is telling them, do not condemn yourself. Do not feel bad that you did this to me. You did not send me here, but the Lord has sent me. And Joseph beautifully says that the Lord sent me here so that I can become a remnant to save this nation. The Lord has sent me so that I can save the people of Israel, because there is going to be a famine and there is going to be no food. Probably if Joseph was not there in Egypt, the sons of Jacob would have died of famine. That's why Jacob says, don't do, that's why Joseph says, don't worry that you send me. No, 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 no. God sent me here. In everything, God's hand was there. It is said, as the rosary beads are connected by a thread, we see the rosary, we don't see the thread. But the thread is inside and it's connecting. Our life is connected by God's hand and grace. And there's an invisible hand of God. There's an invisible thread in our life that everything happens in God's plan. Dear friends, we can easily accept God's invisible hand when good things happen, when neutral things even happen. But when bad things happen, how can we say that God's hand is there? God is guiding, that God is in control, God's plan is there. How can we understand? Particularly when bad things happen for good people. This person is called Nick Wojcik. He was born in Australia. When he was born without arms and leg. And his parents did not know. And you know, without arms and leg, how terrible life would be. We need arms and legs all the time. If we do not have arms and legs, how miserable our life would be. Nick says, more than this practical difficulty of not having arms and legs, I cannot rub my face, I cannot do anything. What was hard for him? He grew up in a very staunch Christian family. His parents were strong believers. And what Nick could not understand, if God loves my family, if God loves my parents, why did he allow this to happen? He went to Sunday school as a good Christian and they told him, God loves you. That was terrible for him. If God loves me, why he allowed this to happen? And in fact, he was growing in so much of pain because he saw his friends doing, but he could not do anything, and his friends were making fun of him. No hands, no legs, no life. And he was so worried how his life is going to be when his parents die and go. And he was terribly pain, sad and depressed. At the age of 10, he wanted to commit suicide. He wanted to kill himself. You know, God spoke to him one day. When he was reading John chapter, I the story of the blind man, a man born with blindness. The disciples of Jesus asked him, why he is born blind? Why he is born blind? Is it because of his sins or because of the sins of his parents? Jesus says, not because of sins, because of his parents' sins, because God's glory will be revealed. God's glory will be revealed. Then Nick, as a believer, said, God, give me arms and legs so that I will go to the ends of the world. I will go to the ends of the world and proclaim God's power and glory. And God never gave him arms and legs. And he says, God one day spoke to him in his heart and said, do you need arms and legs to proclaim my word? Without arms and legs, you can proclaim my word. He says that day he realized that God has a plan for him. He has become today an international motivational speaker, and he has traveled more than 67 countries, taking to millions of people the message of hope. And he says beautifully, if God has a plan for the blind man in John chapter 9, 1 to 12, he said, God has a plan for me. And today he is an international motivational speaker. And he says that he has written a book. When you're small, boys made fun of him. No arms, no legs, no life. He writes, no arms, no legs, no worry. And he says in an interview beautifully, I'm happy that I don't have arms and legs, because arms and legs somehow will give arthritis one day for you. In other words, even in moments of pain, God has some plan for us. And today he has become, because he doesn't have arms and legs, he has become a messenger of hope to many people who does not have hope. A man born blind, God has a plan. A man without arms and legs, God has a plan. If so, God has a plan for you. He has become a messenger of hope. This is what we read from Bible. Jesus says, are not two sparrows sold for a penny? And penny is the lowest money. And he says, for lowest money, two sparrows are sold. Even one of that sparrow, half of the penny worth sparrow, is also in God's hand. And hair is a very insignificant thing. And it is not that God is counting our hair. It is that what is insignificant to us is significant to God. So God is in control. God's invisible hand is guiding our lives. We don't see, but it is there. God's hand. And the God's invisible hand, Amitabh Bachchan, the star of Indian movies. You know, Amitabh Bachchan is very old. He is still the highest paid star in Indian cinemas. Once they did an interview to Amitabh Bachchan and said, Amitabh Bachchan, how can you be so successful? You got so many failures in your life. You are at one moment bankrupt. You are at one moment about to be killed. You had sicknesses. How still you could be successful? What Amitabh Bachchan said something is very interesting. Amitabh Bachchan said, when I was a small boy, my dad used to say, Amitabh, if you get what you desire, it is good. If you get what you desire, it is good. If you get what you don't desire, it is better. Amitabh, as a young man, used to get angry, it seems. Dad, if I get what I desire is good. If I get what I don't desire, it is bad. But you are telling it is better. His father used to tell Amitabh, you are desiring something, you are working hard for it, you are getting it is good. You are desiring something, you are working hard for it, but you get something else. You did not want it. Who is giving to you this one that you did not want? I do not know. Maybe a big power that is greater than me, because I am desiring something, I'm working for it, but I'm getting something else. Amitabh father told, do you think that the bigger power will give you the bad thing? Amitabh Bachchan said, when I was small, I did not understand. But when I grew up, I understood. So I used to work hard. I used to desire. If I get something that I desire, I'm happy. I work hard, I desire something. But if I don't get what I desire, I get something else, I accept it quickly. That's the secret of my happiness and the secret of my success. Dear friends, God's hand is in control. Everything happens for a reason. because God is in control. His invisible hand is there. As psalmist says that everything in my life is carefully planned, even the difficult thing. God has a plan. God has a purpose. God's invisible hand is always there. His providence, His power is always there. Dear friends, we are in the moment of Christmas. God's invisible hand becomes visible in the person of Christ. We read in Hebrews very beautifully. Paul says, in the first starting of Hebrew, in olden times, in past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets and in very different times and different ways. But in our time, God is speaking to us through His only Son. What a beautiful phrase. That the invisible hand of God which is there, which is guiding every moment and activity of this world, is made visible. That we became aware of this invisible God is made available to us, made visible to us through the person of Jesus. What we see in the manger is the visible sign of God's presence. He is Emmanuel, that He came to dwell among us. The invisible hand of God made visible by pitching a tent among us. Christmas, the manger, the star, and the colors is the invisible hand of God that is that always is made visible at one moment. That's why Paul beautifully says, in the past, in olden times, God spoke to our ancestors in many different ways through the prophets, through different moments. But to us, He is speaking through His only Son. This also we find in John 3:36 that God, to reveal His love, He gave His only Son. God's love is there. His invisible hand is there. And that invisible hand is made visible during this time of Christmas. Christmas is the explicit sign of God's interest and involvement in human life. Christmas is an explicit sign of God's interest and involvement in your life, in my life, in our life, in the life of the universe. Christmas is God's manifest presence among us, God's visible hand among us. Dear friends, as we prepare for Christmas, can we become little more open, little more opening our eyes to see the visible hand of God, to recognize the visible hand of God? The more we recognize during this Christmas preparation the visible hand of God in our lives, we may have the wisdom, we may have the courage, we may have the knowledge to recognize the invisible hand of God. Nick Wojcik, when he realized the invisible hand of God. Joseph in the Old Testament, when he realized the invisible hand of God, they could even turn their adversaries into blessings. Amitabh Bachchan, when he was able to accept the invisible hand of God, everything becomes a success, everything becomes happiness for him. Let this Christmas moment help us to recognize the visible hand of God so that we can also recognize the invisible hand of God that is always present among us. Let this be a moment of preparation for us. Can we pause for a moment of prayer? Gracious and loving Lord, as we prepare for receiving Jesus, as we prepare for Christmas, may we realize that Jesus is the visible hand of you. Jesus is the visible presence of you. Jesus is God Emmanuel. Help us to prepare to see this visible hand of you so that we can recognize day after day the invisible hand of you in our lives. May Christmas be a moment of recognizing you. God bless us and happy Christmas to us.